Stop the scroll, because this Jay-Z courtroom move just exposed the one thing money still has not been able to bury. Not the rumor, not the old lawsuit, not the headline, the contradiction. Jay-Z is back in court over a six-figure debt tied to the decade-long paternity war surrounding Rymir Satterthwaite and Lillie Coley, and the number on paper is $119,235.45. Sounds surgical, sounds technical, sounds like a billionaire cleaning up loose ends. But that number is not the story. That filing is not the story. The real story is a pattern. The real story is what happens when Jay-Z wants public pressure for profit, but suddenly treats public pressure like a disease the second public pressure stops serving Jay-Z. And once that pattern snaps into focus, this whole case stops looking like a boring bankruptcy dispute and starts looking like a power test. Because Jay-Z is not only trying to collect a debt, Jay-Z is trying to decide who gets to accuse, who gets to ask, who gets to persist, and who gets crushed for refusing to disappear. Start at the end, because the ending tells on the beginning. In 2026, Jay-Z asked the bankruptcy court to keep Lillie Coley from wiping away that $119,235.45 fee award through bankruptcy. Jay-Z's side argues that the debt came out of fraudulent statements, harassment, and years of vexatious filings. Jay-Z's side says the litigation was not a good faith search for truth. Jay-Z's side says the litigation was a targeted campaign. And legally, Jay-Z may have every right to make that argument. Legally, courts already dismissed multiple connected claims. Legally, anti-SLAPP rules helped produce the fee award after Coley's 2025 California federal lawsuit got thrown out. Legally, Jay-Z has a strong shield. But social stories are not built on legal paperwork alone. Social stories get built on memory. Social stories get built on tone. Social stories get built on hypocrisy. And that is where this gets dangerous for Jay-Z. Rewind one layer. Before the bankruptcy fight, before the six-figure fee fight, before the fresh filings, the core dispute had already burned for years. Rymir Satterthwaite publicly claimed Jay-Z was Rymir Satterthwaite's biological father. Wanda Satterthwaite, now deceased, sat at the center of that original allegation. Jay-Z denied the allegation. Courts dismissed actions connected to claim. A DNA result never arrived at the public square, and that vacuum created the oxygen for every theory, every reaction video, every argument, every side-eye, every rumor, every freeze frame, every comment section civil war. That vacuum matters, because uncertainty does not die when power says uncertainty is annoying. Uncertainty mutates. Uncertainty hardens. Uncertainty becomes folklore, and folklore becomes a threat that no publicist can fully erase. Now rewind again, because the deeper timeline tells the truth louder than the latest headline. Jay-Z spent years building an image that blended brilliance, strategy, cool detachment, and ruthless execution. Jay-Z taught an entire generation that business moves are chess, not checkers. Jay-Z sold the language of leverage as lifestyle. Jay-Z made pressure look elegant. Jay-Z made retaliation look refined. Jay-Z made winning look inevitable. So when Jay-Z walks into court over a debt, like $119,235.45, regular people do not see only a filing. Regular people see a billionaire spending energy to make sure a woman tied to an ugly public allegation feels the full weight of losing. Regular people do not hear non-dischargeability. Regular people hear message. Regular people hear example. Regular people hear, if a billionaire decides a lesson matters, even bankruptcy may not save a person from the lesson. That would already be enough to light the internet up. But the true fuel is not cruelty alone. The true fuel is contradiction. Because Jay-Z has never operated like a man who believes collective pressure is useless. Jay-Z knows collective pressure works. Jay-Z knows targeted pressure works especially well. Jay-Z knows consumer behavior can become a weapon, a market signal, a cultural threat, and a launch pad. That truth is not hidden in a vault. That truth sits in plain sight across Jay-Z's own history. Remember the Cristal moment. When Cristal became associated with rap wealth status and club culture, controversy around remarks tied to the brand exploded. Jay-Z did not respond by telling people to stay calm and keep shopping as usual. Jay-Z responded by helping turn outrage into direction. That direction did not float in the air with no destination. That direction had an economic roadmap. Pull spending from one symbol. Push status toward another symbol. Shift desire. Shift money. Shift allegiance. Then watch a replacement luxury story bloom. That was not passive observation. That was cultural judo. That was market choreography. That was proof that Jay-Z understands a concentrated public move can do what endless speeches cannot. Remember the Grammy pressure moments around Beyoncé. Again, Jay-Z did not move like a person who thinks public pressure is childish. Jay-Z moved like a person who knows institutions bend when enough eyes gather, enough voices align, and enough stakes enter the room. Jay-Z understands that spectacle can discipline power. Jay-Z understands that outrage can become infrastructure. Jay-Z understands that the crowd is not embarrassing when the crowd helps the house win. That is why this new court fight lands so badly in the court of public opinion. Not because Jay-Z filed paperwork. Because the filing reopens the oldest question around celebrities and power. When does principle end and convenience begin? And here's the part nobody should rush past. This Jay-Z story is not really about whether a billionaire is technically allowed to chase money. Billionaires chase money every day. This Jay-Z story is about whether Jay-Z gets to shame ordinary people for coordinated economic behavior in one season, then turn around and deploy coordinated pressure, legal exhaustion, strategic patience, and consequence. Engineering in another season, without anybody noticing the costume change. That costume change is the scandal. That costume change is the hook. That costume change is why the story refuses to stay inside dry legal language. Now add the image problem. Jay-Z has spent decades existing as more than a rapper. Jay-Z is husband to Beyoncé. Jay-Z is father. Jay-Z is mogul. Jay-Z is boardroom energy in human form. Jay-Z is generational ambition with a billionaire finish. Every move from a figure like that gets judged against the mythology, not just the statute. A young, reckless star can get away with chaos because chaos fits the brand. Jay-Z does not have that luxury. Jay-Z built a brand around elevation, foresight, discipline, and executive restraint. So when Jay-Z appears to press down hard over a debt connected to one of the ugliest rumor cycles of Jay-Z's public life, the move feels smaller than the image. And once a big image makes a small move, the internet smells blood immediately. Here comes a forgotten detail that changes the temperature. Courts can dismiss lawsuits, but dismissals do not automatically erase cultural suspicion. Dismissal is not the same as emotional closure. Fee awards are not the same as narrative victory. A bankruptcy objection is not the same as moral clarity. Jay-Z may win every procedural battle available and still lose the wider symbolic war if the public decides this looks like a billionaire trying to stomp uncertainty into the pavement. Power often makes that mistake. Power thinks exhaustion is persuasion. Power thinks finality on paper produces finality in memory. Power thinks a judge ending a case means culture ends a conversation. Culture does not work that way. And that is why this latest filing is so combustible. The move pulls three explosive wires at once. First wire, class. Most people watching do not identify with the billionaire. Most people watching identify with the person who cannot afford 10 years of legal stress. Second wire, fairness. Even people who think Jay-Z is probably right can still feel a chill when a rich man keeps pressing after the main victory is already secured. Third wire, hypocrisy. Once hypocrisy enters a story, facts stop moving alone. Facts arrive carrying every old quote, every old boycott, every old business lesson, every old moment when public energy suddenly became noble because Jay-Z could direct the current. Look at how this plays in ordinary language. A person scrolling a feed does not say, interesting non-dischargeability action under bankruptcy law. A person scrolling a feed says, wait, Jay-Z is still on this? A person scrolling a feed says, wait, Jay-Z had enough after winning, but not enough to walk away? A person scrolling a feed says, wait, Jay-Z mocked collective pressure before, but Jay-Z built empires from collective pressure when the math looked favorable? That is viral architecture, not complexity. Compression. The biggest stories compress into one line. This story compresses into one brutal line. Jay-Z loved pressure when pressure made Jay-Z richer, but Jay-Z hates pressure when pressure points back at Jay-Z. Now, to be fair, Jay-Z's camp has arguments that matter. Jay-Z's camp can point to years of filings. Jay-Z's camp can point to the dismissed 2025 suit. Jay-Z's camp can point to California's anti-SLAPP framework. Jay-Z's camp can point to public statements characterizing the whole saga as long-running harassment. Jay-Z's camp can argue that backing off would only reward bad faith litigation tactics. Jay-Z's camp can argue that if a person weaponizes courts and media, consequences should remain consequences even in bankruptcy. Those arguments are real. Those arguments are not ridiculous. Those arguments may even be persuasive to a judge. But a judge is not the only audience. A judge rules on law. The audience rules on meaning. Because the audience has been trained by Jay-Z's own legend to read moves strategically. Jay-Z cannot spend a lifetime teaching the public that every move is a move, then ask the public to stop reading moves as moves when the spotlight gets uncomfortable. Jay-Z taught people to look for the angle. Jay-Z taught people to ask who benefits. Jay-Z taught people to distrust innocence when profit is nearby. Jay-Z taught people that culture is a marketplace, and marketplaces reward positioning. So now the same analytical habits are being used on Jay-Z. That is poetic. That is also dangerous. Take the alleged son storyline itself. The public has lingered on that storyline for one very simple reason. Unresolved stories stick harder than disproven stories. If a test publicly closed a loop years ago, the gossip machine would have lost oxygen. If the world saw undeniable proof one way or the other, the emotional marketplace would have moved on faster. Instead, the dispute became a permanent maybe. And maybe is the most viral word in modern celebrity culture. Maybe does not need proof. Maybe only needs resemblance, silence, refusal, and time. Maybe does not leave. Maybe collects dust and still breathes. Maybe is why this fight still generates reaction long after most legal consumers forgot the docket number. And here comes a reverse timeline twist that makes the story hit even harder. The $119,235.45 may be the smallest number in the whole situation, but the number may produce the biggest symbolic cost. For Jay-Z, $119,235.45 is not existential money. For Lillie Coley, that number appears life-altering. For the audience, that mismatch turns arithmetic into morality theater. Once morality theater starts, nobody cares that precision exists. People care that scale exists. A billionaire pressing a six-figure judgment does not read like self-defense to large parts of the public. A billionaire pressing a six-figure judgment reads like domination. And domination is always a slippery brand note. Great artists can survive arrogance. Moguls can survive greed. Icons can survive contradiction for a while. But domination without emotional intelligence creates backlash, because domination reminds regular people how little margin exists in everyday life. Rent can break a household. Medical bills can break a household. A court judgment can break a household. Bankruptcy usually enters a story because the breaking already happened. So when the public sees Jay-Z trying to keep that debt alive beyond bankruptcy, empathy does not rush toward the billionaire. Empathy rushes toward vulnerability. Viral heat follows empathy far more often than legality. Here is another that nobody is connecting enough. Jay-Z's best defense used to be mystique. Mystique worked when distance felt regal. Mystique worked when silence looked disciplined. Mystique worked when the audience still gave powerful men extra credit for staying above the mess. That era is fading. The modern internet punishes vacuum. The modern internet treats silence like space waiting to be colonized by interpretation. The modern internet does not reward attachment the same way older media ecosystems did. In this environment, every silent move gets narrated by somebody else. And if the somebody else finds a clean contradiction, the contradiction outruns the original facts almost every time. That is exactly what is happening here. The contradiction is cleaner than the paperwork. The contradiction spreads faster than the docket. The contradiction is easier to remember than the statute. Jay-Z may win the legal point and still hand critics the cultural line that refuses to die. So what is the real unique angle in this story? Not paternity, not bankruptcy, not fees, control. This is a control story disguised as a debt story. Jay-Z wants control of cost. Jay-Z wants control of consequence. Jay-Z wants control of what persistence will cost the next person who tries to turn allegation into a decade-long campaign. Jay-Z is signaling that the bill for chasing Jay-Z can stay due even after public attention fades. That is an elite move. That is also the exact kind of move that radicalizes ordinary viewers against elite behavior. And once ordinary viewers start connecting this to every other moment when public loyalty was summoned for somebody else's bottom line, the story scales. Because then the question becomes wider than Jay-Z. The question becomes, why do billionaires respect the crowd only when the crowd can be directed like capital? Why do billionaires call the public wise when the public buys, streams, boycotts, votes, defends, reposts, and uplifts on command, but call the public foolish, emotional, or misled the second public energy becomes inconvenient? Jay-Z just happens to be the face on this question today. The most brutal version of the argument against Jay-Z sounds like this. Jay-Z wants the muscle of the people without the memory of the people. Jay-Z wants collective force without collective accountability. Jay-Z wants the public to forget the lessons Jay-Z personally taught about leverage. Jay-Z wants pressure to be legitimate only when pressure answers to Jay-Z. That is a devastating read. And whether that read is fully fair almost stops mattering once the read becomes emotionally satisfying to enough viewers. Now, picture the final reaction loop. First, viewers hear Jay-Z back in court. Second, viewers hear over alleged son Saga. Third, viewers hear against the godmother in bankruptcy. Fourth, viewers hear for $119,235.45. Fifth, viewers remember every lecture, every rollout, every moment when economic behavior magically became noble because Jay-Z had skin in the result. At that point, The case no longer lives as law. The case becomes allegory, because allegories let everybody smuggle personal anger into one headline. People angry at billionaire immunity see proof. People angry at selective activism see proof. People angry at celebrity coldness see proof. People suspicious of corporate-aligned black elites see proof. People tired of being mobilized only when rich people need a public chorus see proof. The filing becomes a mirror. And once a headline becomes a mirror, the story gets bigger than the people named in the caption. That is why Jay-Z may have made a strategically correct move that was narratively catastrophic. Strategic correctness without narrative intelligence backfires in public life all the time. Lawyers optimize for outcomes. Culture optimizes for resonance. The move that helps in court can still scorch reputation outside court. Jay-Z's move lives exactly in that gap. Even the strongest pro-Jay-Z defense has a weakness built inside. That defense says persistent harassment should carry consequences. Fine, but consequence is not automatically the same as relentless pursuit. Consequence can look proportionate or theatrical, depending on who is delivering the consequence and how much power already sits in the room. When a billionaire delivers a consequence against a financially cornered opponent, audiences do not instinctively see civic order restored. Audiences see force multiplied by status. That image is hard to beat once the image settles. And if Jay-Z thought the public would treat this like a minor housekeeping action, that assumption may have been the biggest misread of all. Celebrity audiences forgive scandals faster than lectures. Celebrity audiences forgive messy romance faster than contempt. Celebrity audiences forgive ambition faster than smugness. But celebrity audiences do not like feeling used. That is the hidden nerve. Once viewers feel like support was welcome only when profitable, resentment starts writing the script by itself. So the real question is not whether Jay-Z can win. Jay-Z can win on paper. The real question is whether Jay-Z can stop this from becoming a referendum on selective principle. The real question is whether Jay-Z can stop viewers from pulling old boycott history into the same frame as his bankruptcy objection. The real question is whether Jay-Z can keep this from hardening into a simple, sticky, unforgettable line about power using the people, then sneering at the people when the people use the same tactics independently. Because once that line locks in, every future lecture lands differently. Every future appeal to solidarity lands differently. Every future public move gets filtered through suspicion. And that is how reputational erosion begins, not with one giant collapse. With one contradiction too clear to explain away. Jay-Z may still collect the money. Jay-Z may still get the legal ruling. Jay-Z may still outlast the outrage. Power often does. But power also leaves fingerprints. This move left fingerprints. And those fingerprints point to something much larger than one debt. A worldview where collective force is genius when directed from the penthouse and foolish when rising from the sidewalk. That is why this story matters. Not because $119,235.45 changes Jay-Z's balance sheet. Because the filing may change how a lot of people hear Jay-Z forever. And that is the sting. Jay-Z did not just reopen a case. Jay-Z reopened a memory. Jay-Z reopened every question about who gets grace, who gets crushed, who gets called strategic, who gets called bitter, who gets to mobilize a crowd, and who gets mocked for trying. In other words, Jay-Z may have won the law and still reminded the culture why the culture stopped trusting billionaire sermons in the first place. So when next headline says Jay-Z is only protecting a judgment, do not stop at the judgment. Follow the pattern. Follow the pressure history. Follow the class optics. Follow the selective morality. Then ask the only question that matters. If Jay-Z built part of a dynasty by proving targeted pressure works, why does targeted pressure suddenly become embarrassing only when the target has a mirror and the mirror reflects Jay-Z back to the public?